Gilbert?
It's also good to show that we're not like giving everybody a blank check.
Exactly.
But also, what else was I going to say? That these illegal growers or whatever, the city, if I can make a suggestion about policy, I don't know, it kind of sounds stupid, but if they were legalize it, we could have, these are our grows, and the police could cooperate by saying, we'll leave those alone and everything else is illegal. I mean, that sounds simple, but, I mean...
Well, the problem with that is that we want to have a voluntary process for cultivators, right? Because we don't want to have everybody register with the city, because at any point, because we don't have a clear written policy from the Obama administration yet, that list could be subpoenaed.
Right.
And we don't want that. But what we do want is people to voluntarily comply with the suggested guidelines. And we can, through our patient centers and dispensaries, hand our growers a checkoff list to have on their door. And if their neighbor ever turns them in, they can say, hey, Mr. Officer, look, I'm part of the Safe Cultivation Project of San Francisco. I have everything checked off. I have my electricity done up to code. Here are my patient paper files, and the cops will just walk out of the door. Believe me, if they see that you're organized and safe, they really don't have bad intention towards our community, and they really are trying to get people out of neighborhoods who might be doing things to endanger public safety. For example, burning down your neighbor's house is about the rudest thing you can do. Okay? And if you don't have safe electricity, you're going to do that. One of the things that me and Kathy have been stressing to the deputy chief that we don't want to see out there is what we call absentee grows. That means nobody lives in the building, all it is a garden, and it's monitored by machines. Those tend
to burn up.
And there's plenty of patients, disabled patients, that would be willing to live in those houses.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And take care of that garden and make sure the fire, alarm is on. Make sure that the water isn't going to the downstairs neighbors. Make sure the place is soundproof. Make sure the place is odor-proof. The compassionate community has safety guidelines available for people that we aren't supportive of what's going on with these growers that aren't abiding by compassionate law, and law being just common sense and dignity, not written law. And also letting folks know that if you're growing cannabis in San Francisco and you aren't putting any medicine towards the people in San Francisco who need it, you need to get the hell out of San Francisco. You do not need to be having a grow in San Francisco if you are doing it for commercial purposes only. Need to know how to do their garden correctly, and shown that it makes a difference in people's lives to be compassionate, 9 out of 10 would choose that path. And that's where I would rather operate from than criminalizing, right? And just assuming that people can't change their path that they're on. And even with, most of the stuff that we've been dealing with in the new guidelines from the Attorney General Brown, when I called their office, I said, are you looking to close down dispensaries with this? And they said, no, we're looking for compliance.
This is Shona Gokenauer, and thank you for taking so much time out of your busy schedule to chat with me. Could you please tell our viewers about the task force? I just showed about 15 minutes worth of video about a meeting you had with regarding the task force and the number of plants allowed, and how 60 people aren't going to get at the table. The city isn't going to have 60 people on the task force. So could you please update the viewers on in the rest of this episode why we needed a task force and who's in charge, and the issues that they deal with, please?
Sure. Let me break that down a little bit, because that's a lot of territory to cover. The first thing I want to answer is what is a task force, and then I'll go into why we need a task force, and then can I end with why the city isn't going to seat 60 people, and etc. Is it okay if I work that way?
Mm-hmm. You've already, in the previous video we just showed, that you did explain why the city won't have 60 people on the task force.
Okay, so I'll keep that real small, but basically what happened about, now it's almost 3.5, almost 4 years ago, was that we formed a coalition. It was the SF Progressive Patients and Providers Coalition, which was HopeNet, Alternative Relief, Medican, Commissioners Holland and Olagi, Reverend Randy Webster. We also worked with Pier 5 lawyer group, and specific James Clark, who is really always a pleasure to work with. And what we decided was that in order to be able to maintain the city's medical cannabis program for the patients, we were going to need to have a way to do that. It wasn't going to end with the MCD ordinance. There were going to be ongoing issues, because if you take into consideration that we have 13,000 plus patients, so really double that at least, and then you take into consideration the people that travel to San Francisco for their medical cannabis needs, it's something that is far more in-depth and expansive, and it's going to be a huge chunk of public health in San Francisco, and it will be in the other medical cannabis states as well. So we have to show, how do you regulate this, how do you involve the stakeholders in the community. And one of the problems that we were having at the beginning of the medical cannabis ordinance was that there was one small group of people that actually only wanted 14 clubs to be permitted, and they happened to all have one lawyer, Terrence Hallahan. And then we had the larger policy groups like Americans for Safe Access. So there wasn't a lot of representation of the mom and pop owners of the smaller dispensaries, which tend to be the more compassionate, direct service providers, and we didn't have authentic representation of the concerns of the patients in San Francisco. And so what my goal with this is to bring democratic process, to bring the merchants and the patient advocates as equals to the table, to bring the policy folks to the table to do what policy folks do the best: advise us on policy, not create our policies, not restrict us with their sort of armchair, philosophy.